So I'm going to give a fairly short presentation on oilseed crushing. I've actually spent the past year, as I've realized the importance of feedstocks all around. There's been a huge emphasis on used fryer oil in this conference. I realized it about 9 months ago and put a huge emphasis on marine crushing because I thought that, wow, Greg mentioned last night that the restaurants are the originators of the value. I actually think that the farmers are the real originators of the oil value. So I wanted to delve into it. It seemed like a big Pandora's box that a lot of folks hadn't really looked into. So I'm reporting back. So first off, as most people know, you can really, when you talk about oil extraction, you're really talking about two very different camps. You've got big, which is typically a solvent extraction, and then you've got smaller scale, which is a mechanical extraction when you use an oilseed press, for instance. Although hexane extraction has the advantage of you get out all of the oil, or 99% of the oil, whereas with mechanical extraction you typically leave 8 to 10% residual oil in the meal. The nice thing about oilseed pressing with a press is that you can do it, it scales right down. There's all different size presses, whereas hexane extraction, you're talking about a huge facility. So, for the purposes of this, I'm going to stay away from hexane extraction. I do know a bit about hexane extraction, so if anybody's interested, we can talk about that afterwards. The big question that you always get when you enter into this space is Chinese or fancy European. And everybody feels very strongly about this. And what I really think is which press you choose depends on what your goal is. So if you're a big do-it-yourselfer and you don't mind swapping out this weird 308 volt motor, and you don't mind redoing the shaft has a little bit of a kink in it as it spins around every single time, or you notice that there's certain parts that may very well need to be replaced or reinforced, Chinese press might very well be your cup of tea. If, however, you're looking for something that's well engineered, it's more of a plug and play, you typically cut off the plug on the end of it and put something that plugs into a regular 220 outlet, and you turn one of these European presses right on, dump your canola in, and voila, out comes the oil. I mean, it's literally, those are the differences. However, when you look at the pricing, just to get an example, these presses, by the way, are typically rated in tons per 24-hour period. So when you look it up, you'll hear people say, oh, I got a 5-ton Chinese press, I got a 10-ton Chinese, whatever it may be. When you're looking at the Chinese presses, for instance, a 10-ton per day might be on the order of $5,000 delivered. If you can get it from let's jump right in. If you get it from the Chinese manufacturer instead of a distributor, which is an interesting, it is possible. Most people aren't aware of this. Most people are getting their presses from the distributors in the US. And they are basically doubling the price right now. So a 10-ton press, oftentimes, if you get it from the distributor, is $10,000, half that price or less if you get it from the actual manufacturer in China. And what I found, I actually did some back and forth with the manufacturers. I can give you that contact information if you'd like. And they're fairly responsive, actually. It's all by email. They speak or write at least fairly decent English. They give you, a little bit, and then you do it. And I've never ordered one directly, although I did order one from a distributor a few years ago. And but the sense that I get from talking with others that have ordered directly from the manufacturer is that it tends to do all right. You deal with the custom stuff, and it arrives. Not all that dissimilar to a European press.
What is the difference between food grade and non-food grade?
I'll get to that actually at the very end. The difference is basically cleanable surfaces. That's the main difference. When you start going for food grade, think like certified kitchen.
I just have one comment. I'm an importer by trade, so when you wire your money out to this manufacturer overseas, you are putting a lot of faith that you're going to get something back.
That's true.
So be careful.
That absolutely. And I don't mean to steal business away from you in any way. Let me put in the caveat that the distributors that are doing a good job are worth that money, because maybe they're swapping out the motors, and maybe they're reinforcing the parts they know that are weak, and they're dealing with the customs, and they're dealing with all of that stuff that you're going to have to do. Now, you can probably back me up that these presses don't arrive ready for prime time. They don't arrive and they're not ready to just plug in and go.
I don't import presses, so I don't know for sure, but I do import from China. So.
Oh, gotcha. Well, this is what I found. So now I will say that I know a number of people that from one particular manufacturer, I know a number of people that have ordered presses, and all of them reported that they arrived and were working, all that kind of stuff. Every single time, though, they've required a lot of work to get working. So it's like, you know, once it comes in from China, it's very difficult to say, well, you know, it was missing this bolt or this thing or whatever. It's a pain in the butt. However, you can get a big one. So here's like a nice big 10-ton. My friend Ken has this up in Canada, where he has this big hopper and he runs it in, and the press cake comes out of here, and the oil comes out of here. And what we found is that you can get them to work. You put in the time. It's kind of like you play around with it on your weekends and your evenings for a few months, and over time you build up the system around it and the automatic hopper. And you don't generally want to leave these things just running 24 hours a day. The big Chinese presses don't have a whole lot of automatic shutoff on them. They don't have a whole lot of safety features built in. They're kind of the type of thing where you can leave running, but you kind of want to be checking on it every 15, 20 minutes to make sure nothing's gone terribly wrong, which is kind of a disadvantage. And it's a big disadvantage, right? Because the best would be just to let it go and come back at the end of the day and shut the thing off. However, because it's much bigger in size, in the same amount of time, in a shorter amount of time, you can get all of that crushing done that you might not be able to get done with a fancy European.
Yeah, we were doing a project to do like a mobile seed crusher with one of those Keenstar brothers out of China, and I mean, yeah, we really had to fight with it. You had to fight the screw real bad. The auger system was terrible. The thing at the end where you could pull the screw back was terrible. We had to scrap the project basically because we didn't want to spend the time to fight with the press. And I'd heard of people getting them to work too, but
they don't lock down real well either. Even though you have the two. Sometimes they shake.
Yeah.
You get rotation.
I mean, they work. So here's the deal. If you're a machinist, and seriously, no, you're a machinist or you're a mechanic and that's what you do, you know, and by the way, that's where a lot of these folks are farmers, and like on the side, they like rebuild their engines, you know, like that's the deal. And for them, they can't understand why somebody would spend $10,000 on an oilseed press when they got theirs for $3. And sure, they had to take it apart and figure it all out and put it back together, but that's what they like to do anyway. They take apart their Toyota transmission on their weekend because it had a funny little jerk to it, you know? Just if you're in that mindset, if that's what you do, by the way, Chinese press may be perfect for you. If not, you may want to wait for the next slide. I do want to talk a little bit about how this particular press works and how these Chinese presses in general work. They work on a principle that most larger scale presses do. What happens is there's an auger that feeds the seed through, and it goes through a cage system that's slightly tapered, and as it's feeding it through, the seeds get slowly compacted until it starts to push it out through these little slits, and you set your spacings of those slits based on whatever type of feedstock you're going through. And by the way, with these, it's very difficult to change back and forth between grossly different sized, for instance, soybeans to canola. That would be very difficult to do because it takes a lot of time to resize all those spacings. So that's a big disadvantage of these. They tend to be more, you can do the smaller size seeds and those will work if you want to do sunflowers or whatever it is, but you got to sort of stick with what you got. And then, so what happens is these big flakes come off the end. The oil, there's a little drip pan that goes down into something down there, and the oil comes off fairly segregated. The trick with these presses is to do the best job you possibly can, separating out the sediment from the oil at the point of pressing. And oftentimes with these Chinese presses, I'll advise people to slow it down. Get a variable speed motor and crank that baby down, slow it down. Don't run it at the full 10-ton capacity because you're missing out on oil and you're going to create a whole lot of extra work for yourself. If you slow it down, you'll get better oil extraction and you'll have less sediment in your oil. Yes, sir.
Do you have any experience with the presses from India?
No, I haven't used like the Tiny Tech and those. I haven't. No, I'm sorry.
Just a technical question. When you talk about 10-ton press, is that 10 tons of feedstock in or 10 tons of oil? Or?
No, 10 tons of seed per 24-hour period.
Okay, so feedstock going in.
That's how they're all rated. So you order them by tons of seed. And I get that question a lot is, well, how much oil does that put out? Well, it just depends on which seed is going in, because soybeans only have 20% oil and canola has 40. So, but they still process the same number of tons of seed, you know, in that same time frame.
Are you going to talk about heated versus non-heated?
Canola?
No, on the
Oil presses?
Yes.
I'm going to talk about the use of heat.
Okay.
You're talking about cold pressing, that kind of thing?
Right, but I understand soybean has to get the
That's
yield.
different. No, that's a different thing.
Okay.
But yes, okay. So European press, did I still yeah. This is a Swedish press. This is actually my press right here in the top right. And it works on a slightly different principle, but first of all, you can see it's all stainless steel, which is nice from a food perspective, so we'll talk about getting to food grade at the end. This is the cage here, and the auger sends the seed right up to the end. Out comes the press cake, that's the meal, or the solid batter, we call it press cake. Comes out the end in a semi-pelletized form. You can see what it looks like right here. And then the oil drips out of right here, goes down, and we've got a little, it comes out of this, there's a little hose that attaches to here and takes it down to a bucket. This stand that we built for it has jack stands so that we can raise it up as high as we want for whatever kind of, whatever our application is, to take most advantage of gravity that we possibly can when we're crushing.
What brand is that press in particular that you use?
This one is, I have a tabby press, it's a Swedish model. It's
T-A-B-B-Y?
T-A-B-Y. And what I will say, I mean, there's lots of different brands. So there's Monfort's that makes the Comet press. There's Tabby that makes the Swedish press. I can't even remember them all. There's like 5 or 6 others that are all reputable, and they all operate on pretty much the same principle. Inside, this is a blow-up diagram of what's going on the inside. So this part right here, this nozzle part, inside here, you insert different sized nozzles. And it comes with a whole series of different ones that are different widths, and the orifices are different sizes. And depending on what the moisture content of your seed is, and the size of that seed, you put it in there, and then you turn on the press, and they oftentimes come with either a transmission or some kind of variable speed drive that you can adjust the speed, and have a heating element that's thermostatically controlled. So you get this guy, there's a heating band right here, you start to input your seed through the hopper, and it comes, the oil starts, what happens is that this, instead of being, remember I mentioned that the cage style press is tapered? Well, in this style, it's a straight barrel, and what happens is it pushes, seeds come in at the end, and then you get this very teeny tiny hole right there. And it creates tremendous back pressure on the seed that then forces the oil, only the seed can get through, or only the press cake can get through, the oil goes back through channels that are on the outer part over here and sends it back till you get to this point, which are the oil outlet holes, where the oil then drips out. You see right here in my press, the oil drips down and you catch it and away it goes. I love the fact that this press does an excellent job separating out the solids from the oil. It's very good at that. And all of these presses operate on a very similar principle, so be it the Comet or the Tabby or the variety of other European presses. Some of them are more specifically just for canola. I have found that canola works quite well, so I understand why they're sort of, and rapeseed is a very popular feedstock in the EU, so it makes sense that a couple of them are specializing in canola.
You have to run a test to figure out what the content of the moisture is. You have to send a test set through it to kind of see where you want to set the...
Yeah, let's talk about moisture testers.
What was the approximate cost just of the European model?
I'm sorry, I meant to say that. So my press is, this one what I have right here is a 3/4 ton per day. So we're down from talking about 10 tons all the way down to 3/4 ton per day.
And it's a little hand feed hopper, that's it.
Well, okay, they all come with little hoppers. I mean, if you want to, you just basically deploy it wherever you have a big grain bin and then run the bin into it. So, but yeah, none of them come with like a giant 1,000 bushel grain bin or anything. But anyway, so this guy, 3/4 ton per day, $8,200. So there's the trade-off. This guy was pricey. $8,200, not including the shipping. I had this one go through a distributor. The second one that I ordered, I just got it recently, shipped straight from Sweden, was at $9,000 for the exact same press. Just got my second. So they're expensive. They do work really well. And here's the other thing about them. They shut off automatically if anything clogs, if it overheats, if anything goes wrong. They've got safety mechanisms. Right in here is a what do you call it? A screw that's designed to break something pin. What's it called? Shear pin. Thank you. Sorry. It's got a shear pin in there, so that if something gets jammed in there, that pin breaks. All kinds of little safety mechanisms in place, so that I feel comfortable letting this guy go, and then come back at the very end of the day and just turn it off. And it just can run and run and run and run, and the oil just drips off. So my little 3/4 ton per day doesn't require the babysitting. Much more expensive, much more capital up front, but I can take it to food grade, and it'll just run.
What kind of feedstock do you run for?
I run just about everything through.
Yeah.
Did you run Camelina by any chance?
Many times.
Yes, that's awesome.
So continuous feed, you let it run. If you're standing there, is there some audible thing that happens if it screws up? So it's shut
No, it just shuts off.
shuts off.
It just shuts off.
You run and dodge it.
What's that? No, you don't have to do anything. It just turns itself off and says error.
Yeah, something about those King Stars that we were doing on the project again, it would get stuck up a lot, like it would clog a lot.
Yeah.
And then the cleaning process alone, having to take the whole thing apart, takes about like 2.5 hours to put it apart, take it apart, put it all back together, 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I don't know, did I mention that?
Yeah, it's super
More difficult to service, I think, was what I was getting at with that one.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So all presses have a tendency to do that, by the way. It's not unique to the Chinese presses. What happens is every so often, if you're these presses are better run just continuously, because once you get them going, you don't really like to do anything. You just want to let it go. You know, it's like, oh gosh, she's going. You know, let her go. And I'm always scared to turn it off and then start it back up, you know, 3 hours later, because sometimes I can't get it to go and the oil doesn't want to drip, and all of a sudden it clogs up and it's like, take the whole thing apart. If you've got the Chinese press, woe is you. Seriously, because look at how big and heavy this guy is. It's like, just the screw weighs like 40 pounds, and you're like unscrewing it, you're pulling out this big heavy screw that's all jammed up with this hard, heavy stuff, and you're sitting there with your cold chisel and your hammer, trying to take off this hard stuff. It is a real serious pain. 2.5 hours, that's quick.
Yeah.
I'm impressed that you could do it that quick.
Yeah. We were doing sunflower and it was like epoxy.
Yep, exactly right. It turns hard if you let that stuff sit in there. So one thing that you have to do when you're operating these presses,
You can't control the heat of the Chinese press, which is really important too.
you also, it's very different.
friction-based, so it's...
Well, that's most of the presses, once they get going, are friction-based as well, and then they just use the resistance heater to regulate. They do a little boost.
Well, you don't get that on...
You don't get that on the Chinese, it's true. And then what we were talking about in terms of, so presses must be cleared out after use. The press cake will solidify and clog the press. So when it's done, you close the gate valve or something to stop the seed from going in there, you get it out, and then what I do, to go back to my press here, the amazing thing about this thing, one of the best selling points, and I'm not trying to sell you guys these things, I really do like the fact that this thing comes off, it's got a little spanner wrench that goes on there, I take this thing off, and just run all of the seed out, and it's done. And then all this is a little piece that screws in there, and then another piece that screws into there, and that little nozzle with the orifice I described goes in between the two. So I take it all apart, I clean it all out, I put it all off to the side, and if it should ever get clogged up, at most I have to take this entire piece off. It takes me about 15-20 minutes. I get
Back into the auger now?
What's that? And I can get into the auger, yeah, this is where the auger is.
Okay, so the collet comes out, you can take the nozzle off without...
Yep, that's exactly right. All of this is, the auger only goes up to about here. So I'll see the tip of the auger when I take this off, and that's it. And I don't have to get into the auger and clean this part out. What I do need to do is make sure that I run all the seed out, take this out, and clean out this, and leave the nozzle out and all that kind of stuff for the next run.
That gets back to the moisture. You're gonna talk.
It doesn't necessarily get back to moisture content. What happens is, Okay, it does in some ways, because moisture content, if you have your moisture content wrong, you'll have a hard time getting the oil out, and if it doesn't get the oil out, it'll start to gum up in there and compact, and you'll have problems. So it does in a way go back to moisture content. It also goes back to clearing out the press when you're done with it and making sure you clean all that out. And the thing I really do like about the Europeans ones, they're easy to take apart and clean.
Quarter ton, I mean, how much oil is that in a day?
3/4 ton of, you're talking about canola?
Whatever, I mean, whatever you.
Well, that's the same question that I always ask people, because the point is, it's 3/4 tons of seed, and every seed has different oil content. So if you're talking about canola, you're probably in the like 65 gallon per 24-hour range. It's like basically just over a 55-gallon drum every 24 hours.
Are you cultivating that on site in your location? Or are you
Yeah.
bringing in the crop?
No, we're not actually pressing in a production setting. We're just using it for education and for workshops and learning how the process goes. And we've set this thing up so that we can deploy it at farms that are doing test plots. We realized very early on that we're not farmers. We know a lot about biodiesel, but we don't know a thing about a combine. And it made a lot more sense for us to have a press that could be deployed at a farm that's actually doing it than for us to actually do the canola growing ourselves. So no farm has yet taken us up on it, but the legs of this are just held into place by a pin each. It only takes 5 seconds to take this thing out and set it on the ground.
I can get you one.
What?
Farm.
You're far away.
Well, and the point, you would need a much bigger press to be able to do anything other than educational, right?
No, actually this is appropriately sized for a small farm. The folks that I know that are actually doing this, for instance, up in Vermont, have the size up from this one. It's a 1 ton. It's just slightly larger than this one. And they run it all day long. And they have a giant 1,000-bushel grain bin that feeds right into it. And early in the morning, John gets up at 5 a.m. He goes in, turns on the press, gets it going, and then he goes to tend to the cows and goes around. And at the end of the day, he comes back in, he shuts off the press, and 50 gallons has gone into his oil settling tanks. And once a week, he fires up his reactor, runs a few 100-gallon batch, and that's it. And it's actually perfectly sized. And John has cows, and so, of course, his press cake goes straight to his cows, and that then fertilized. He uses their manure to fertilize his fields, and he grows more sunflower and canola. So it's actually, I think, appropriately sized for a small farm.
Just curiously, how much is a ton of canola seed? If you still want to go out and buy it.
A ton of canola seed?
Yeah.
A ton of canola seed right now is about $550. I think I've got pricing coming up. So, running the press, seed preparation, seed cleaning. A lot of people want to know about seed cleaning, how much you need to do. Really, honestly, the chaff can go in there. It's not a big deal. You need to have rocks and pebbles out. The more contaminants that you have in there, you'll have slightly lower yields. It can affect it. It'll absorb a little bit of the oil itself. But I run it all day long with chaff and a little bit of contaminants in there and some stinkweed and whatever. It doesn't really seem to matter all that much. Just keep the hard stuff out because that can damage the press. That's the most important part. Install a magnet in the hopper. If you're actually, we just do small little batches, so it's not as big a concern to us. But if you really do have the 1,000-bushel grain bin, there could be little chunks of metal that get picked up by your combine that find their way into that bushel, and they can get in there and screw things up a little bit. So you just have a very strong little magnet right as it feeds into the press to grab stuff, and at the end of the day you check it and take out any metal that might be in there. Moisture content is very important. We find that it's very difficult to get good extraction if you're too far off from about 10% in either direction. So shoot for 10. And I've got a little grain moisture tester up here. This is the one that I've used. It's just a John Deere. You can get it at your local John Deere distributor. The way it works is the grain goes in here, this cap screws on, and there's this little metal piece that when it starts to compact it and when it gets flush, that's the right compaction. You set your particular grain here, and 20 seconds later it tells you whatever moisture content your grain is at. Sweet little unit, costs like $300. Just saw it on Craigslist this morning for $100. I immediately said, Temperature is important. We press at between 200 and 300 degrees F, so my particular press has a thermostat. I can just set it, and it runs, and it gets up to temperature with an electrical heater on the tip, And then that thing basically turns off once the press is running. It's just heated by the friction of the actual pressing.
How much energy usage are you putting into this system for the motor and for the heating?
It's about 1.5 to 2 kW.
You're probably going to talk about this in a little bit, but I heard that pressing anywhere above 160 leads to the creation of phospholipids.
Yeah, I'm getting to it. Foots and gums. The sediment will settle to the bottom over about 1 to 2 weeks, and that's just, you know, as it comes out, it's good to go and to settle. We'll talk a little bit. That kind of gets at what you're talking about. Get there. Where does the value come from? So most of you guys know that there's 2 streams that come off an oil press. One is the vegetable oil. That's what we're all interested in. But you can't ignore the meal cake. It's really important not to ignore the meal cake because there's a lot of value in there. And even if you're talking about canola, well, if you're talking about canola, that would be and a mechanical extraction device. You're talking about 70% meal, 30% oil. You can't just be looking at the 30%. What about all the meal that's piling up there? I mean, shoot, we do it on a little demonstration scale, and we still fill 55-gallon drums full of this stuff and have to give it away to farmers. So you've got to be thinking about that. And if you're thinking about this on a farm scale, you need to be thinking about how do you get the proper value. Well, the value is tied for the vegetable oil to the Chicago Board of Trade soy, which is crude degummed. And then the value of soybean meal is also listed on the Chicago Board of Trade website. And for high oil seeds, expect about 40%. For soy, expect about 20%. Remembering that with mechanical extraction, you're going to have 8 to 10% residual. So subtract 8 to 10% from either one of those. In terms of figuring out the meal cake price, if you're looking at canola, you're basically looking at about a 75% discount on whatever the current meal price is for soybeans based on protein content. Just looking at soybeans here, soybeans are, as of this morning, at $14.50 a bushel. Soy oil is at 63 cents, 63.5 cents per pound. Soybean meal is at 376.80 a ton. There's 33 bushels to ton. I did a little bit of crush margin calculations. How would you figure it out? So say you just wanted to set up a crush operation. I just want to be a crusher. All right, well, here's how you do it. You say, okay, up here I have the soybean price. That's how much you pay per soybean times 33.3 to get you up to the to get to a U.S. short ton. And then you run these calculations. And you say, okay, the current soybean oil price is whatever it is. Soybean oil price, 63.5 cents per pound. And then over here you've got your soybean meal price, whatever that is, 376.80 per ton. And you run the calcs, and you will find that right now, if you were to do nothing more than buy soybeans at this price and sell soybean oil and soybean meal at these 2 prices, you make about $71 per ton, assuming you get complete extraction.
Soybean meal is $376 a pound?
As of this, no, as of per ton. As of this morning.
Have you looked into taking the soybean meal and fermenting it into ethanol?
No. I haven't. Sorry.
Possible?
I don't know. I haven't looked into it.
I mean, there is a lot of starch in soybean meal, right? I know it's high protein, but
I guess I don't know. It's outside of my knowledge. Looking at canola, so say, you know, most of us think soy, why the hell is he talking about soy? We all hate soy or whatever, maybe, I don't know, maybe you guys call it soy. But no. So looking at canola, I put up soy because everything is based off soy. So you have to understand soy if you want to understand canola. If you're looking at canola, this is as of this morning, you actually base all your pricing off soybeans, just like that. But then you change this part. So remember here I had the 0.20, assuming that you got 20% oil out. Here you put in 0.4, assuming that you get 40%. Or if you're doing mechanical extraction, you would put in, perhaps better would have been 0.32 or something like that. But assuming you got it all out, 60% meal at this price, 40% oil at this price. You run the margins right now, you make more money per metric ton. That's a little bit bigger.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Yeah, metric ton. So it's probably on the same order of things, maybe slightly higher for canola. And that's probably due to the fact that you get more oil out, and the oil ultimately is higher value per unit than the meal. You guys follow me?
Yeah.
Excellent. So anyway, you guys can run these calculations. I'll just leave these equations on here, and you guys get access to the PowerPoint, so you don't have to worry too much about that. The meal value is primarily dependent on the protein content. The value of the meal is discounted off a comparison to soybean protein content. So when you look at it, you say soybeans are approximately 47% protein, et cetera, right down the list. Animal nutrition is really complicated. So everybody wants to know, can I feed this stuff to my cows or my chickens or whatever? And I always don't know because I never studied that stuff and it's exceedingly complex. The reason is it depends on your particular feedstock and your particular crush pattern. So that particular nutritional analysis of that particular sunflower may be different from the other sunflower that you pressed at a different temperature and came from a different variety. And it's really, actually those intricacies make a big difference. There is some generalizations. So somebody asked about cooking soybeans. Soybeans do have some non-nutritionals in there that have to be taken out if you're going to use them as a meal. So I put in here, basically a general rule is about 20 minutes at 200 degrees F to kill the anti-nutritionals. Canola and sunflower can both be used to provide 100% of the protein needs of dairy. However, dairy don't like it so much when they get too much fat in their ration. They start to get a funny tummy. So you really need to be careful there about having too much, especially if you're doing mechanical extraction, there's going to be a lot of residual fat or oil content in your feed. So you have to be looking at it and making sure that, I got it here, that the dairy ration can be no more, the fat content can be no more than 5% of the total dry matter of the diet. So if you're really getting into it.
And some of these things are okayed by like USDA for cattle feed and some are not. Like I heard Camelina is not yet approved.
Maybe it's not yet approved. I know some folks that are using it. So I do know friends that, if John was here, I bet he would be saying that's probably true. You can't use Camelina, but I have friends that grow Camelina and use it.
Sure.
And the truth is, you're talking about the glucosinolates as the main. Most people don't know Camelina is not a cultivated crop. It's still sort of like a wild thing that people are just starting to select for and figure that out. And so it has glucosinolates, which is what got bred out when we went from rapeseed to canola. However, it's very light on the glucosinolates. And I think it's probably okay in light rationing to go in there, we think.
Yeah, I went to a Montana oilseed for Biodiesel conference, and people were just raving about the value of the Camelina meal. They said you could actually see like the sheen of the cattle's coats would be nicer after they ate this stuff. They said it's great, but it's not yet approved.
The reason that they say that, the reason that there's this perception that Camelina meal is even better perhaps than others is because it has very high essential fatty oils. That's the omega-3s and 6s.
Yes.
And so people get very excited about that.
Right.
One comment, and then I got to move on. Okay, we'll just move forward. So here's an example of nutritional analysis that was done on some sunflower. I highlighted here the crude protein content. This is dry matter. So when you look at the dry matter, this is a nutritional analysis that you would need to get done. And by the way, if you want to get some done, here's some contact information. Go ahead, copy that down. That you would really need to get done if you wanted to, for instance, feed something coming off your press to cattle. Figure it out, get that analyzed first and figure out what you got, and then talk with an animal nutrition specialist about how to ration it in. Because, here we've got a certain amount of crude protein, and we've got our crude fat, and we've got a certain amount of all these different metals, and it's really going to affect the type of rationing that you do.
What does it say for starch?
For starch, where are we on starch?
Right, you just passed it, right there.
Oh, 0.8.
Okay. Thanks, one question.
No, this is sunflowers, by the way.
Yes, I understand.
What's the cost of doing this report?
I don't know, actually. You could give them a call, so there's a phone number here, and perhaps give them a call and ask them.
Are those dehulled sunflowers?
This is not dehulled, this is with hulls. So to dehull sunflowers, you need a device called a decorticator that is basically, I've used one before, it's kind of like this big fancy machine, and in goes the sunflowers, and it has these knives that come down and go like that, and out comes the little sunflower kernels, and they get sifted, and out it goes. If you have one of those, they're great, because the oil content goes from like 30% to like 50% from what you feed it, so it's a really cool thing. not a lot of people have those devices. Degumming. So phospholipids, also known as gums, may be classified as either hydratables or non-hydratables. Non-hydratable gums are often formed during oil extraction because of enzyme activity. We're talking about lipases. Lipases are those nasty little enzymes that are active during certain temperature ranges, and especially when seeds, they're already present in seeds, and when the seeds get damaged, they jump in and get active. And they do different things. They may, for instance, increase your acid content. So you may see your acid value of your oil go up, not just because of what we think of as normal oxidation, but also because these lipases are active. And on top of that, those lipases will form these phospholipids, and especially turn them into the dreaded non-hydratables. Hydratable gums, they'll just tend to fall out. Not the big deal. Those, in fact, just so you know, you can make biodiesel with oil hot off the press, and your hydratables will just fall right to your glycerin phase. It's a really cool thing. You get all the sediments just fall right down to your glycerin. It's a great way to degum fast. Just turn it to biodiesel. Super degumming, however, is necessary to remove non-hydratables, and I've got some information about how that's done. It might also be possible to add phosphoric to your first water wash if you've already turned it to biodiesel and you've still got those non-hydratables present, although I can't confirm it through testing. I just think that it might work. Sorry. So there's some information, and here's a little test that I did with the centrifuge. I was playing around. And you can see here, on the right was right off the press, and the left, I'm sorry, this picture isn't very good. But down here, all of the gums, I basically, you guys know a centrifuge basically accelerates time. It's like a time machine. And so what I was looking at was to see what would settle down and how many gums were actually in there. So, see how that works. If you don't degum, if you don't super degum, so this, a biodiesel plant that I'm friends with was doing this. They're at Canola, straight through the biodiesel plant. They do everything from in goes the canola seed to out comes the finished product. And they tried to degum, but not super degum. And they ended up missing on phosphorus down here. The limit is 10, and they hit 11.3 parts per million. So they missed on their phosphorus spec, and they also very badly missed on the calcium and magnesium spec, which has a limit of 5, and they were at 29, practically 30 parts per million. The reason is that these gums, they didn't super degum, so the phosphorus was present, and these phosphorus compounds are also salts that involve calcium and, calcium and magnesium. And so they get tied up in there, and you see it in terms of missing on your ASTM spec. It's probably still usable fuel, but you can't sell it. Or at least I can say that we used a little bit of it, and we got home. But it's definitely not ASTM spec, so forget selling it if you're ever going to on-road sales. And then lastly, I've just got a couple of ideas for folks that are trying to get the full value. I've been shouting this idea out for a little while now of renting the oil. The concept is, if you're the farmer and you're going through all of the steps of actually growing the crops, and you've got your press in place, and you've done all that kind of stuff, go ahead and set up the sanitary kitchen with the stainless steel oil press and a filter press. You take it to food grade, you bottle it up, people arrive, you got this fancy sunflower oil or canola oil, whatever it is. They take it to the restaurant, and then next week when they come back to pick up the next, they drop off the one you gave and you give them a discount. And then that's what goes into your biodiesel. And they take the value out of this expensive oil that really has no business going straight into biodiesel anyway. So I think that I'm just trying to throw out, again, functional paradigms that might work, right?
Yeah, as a side job you can do, our local food co-op in Pittsburgh sells organic sunflower seed oil for $40 a gallon. So
there's much more money to be made in the food, in turning it into food than into making it into biodiesel. It's almost absurd to make a batch of biodiesel with this sunflower oil, right? I guess, RBD, people want to know about RBD, that's refined, bleached, deodorized. The refining process is the caustic stripping. So that's where you take out the FFAs through caustic stripping with sodium hydroxide. The bleaching is where you typically hit it with some kind of bleaching clays that pull out of the color and the taste. And then deodorizing is where the oil goes in. You hit it with steam under vacuum as it goes into a vacuum chamber and pulls out any leftover taste or any FFAs that are still left in there. That's the oil that you get at the supermarket. You're not going to be able to do RBD on a very, very small scale. Much easier just to filter press it and call it done. The difference is that the oil is going to have some color to it, and more importantly, it's going to have some taste and a lower smoke point. So, for instance, we're not really accustomed to tasting our oils. Much as you may think that you prefer, you know, canola oil over sunflower or soybean oil, there really isn't a whole lot of taste to that oil because they intentionally take it out so you'll taste the food. If you do this and you press the oil and you take it to food grade, you actually can taste like canola, you know, and you're like, oh, actually I didn't realize this stuff had such taste, such a strong taste. So whether or not you can actually rent the oil without going through the RBD process may depend on a local chef, and he may say, you know what, I really don't want this flavor in my food. You got to deal with that and figure that out. The other thing is that chefs are keenly aware of smoke temperature. That's the temperature at which they can take the fryers to before the oil starts to smoke. And if you don't go through the RBD process, the smoke temperature can be a bit lower. Not ridiculously, but it can bump it down a little bit. And again, you've got to talk to the chef about that and try to figure that piece out, something that we've run across.
Does it drop below 350? Yeah. Say, canola?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Using heated canola, so other ideas of stuff that might work. When you grow canola, if you don't store it properly, you can end up with what's called heated canola. Typically it's stored at too high a moisture, or didn't have proper aeration, or had one side that was in the sun that wasn't getting properly aerated, or something like that. It's some biological activity that starts to happen in there, and it actually will break down all the canola and turns it no good. When a canola farmer goes to the grain bin in, say, Montana or Canada, and he shows up, immediately they pull out this little device. It's basically a big plastic strip that has 100 little holes on it. And they put down your canola, put it down, and give it a run through just like that, and they turn it up to look. And if any one of those looks black, they'll discount it. They'll say, okay, you can have up to one black hole, and it's still #1 canola. If you have two, it becomes #2 canola, which gets discounted a price. And if you have 3 or more, no deal. Can't take that canola, and they turn the farmer away. It's what's called then heated canola, and the poor farmer feels terrible about himself, doesn't know how to deal with canola. He's been farming canola for generations, and shoot, he's screwed up, and he goes and dumps it in a field. That's what goes on with canola in Canada right now. People are just starting to realize that there's still oil in the heated canola. So even though the grain bin, Cargill doesn't want to take it, the local biodiesel producer who has this little small-scale oil press might. What I found when I've pressed this heated stuff is that the acid value is higher, so you're going to take a yield loss, but you still can make biodiesel out of it. And the moisture content is ridiculously low, so you're going to have to add moisture back to it, but not go too high. So there's kind of a trick there of adding the moisture back in and adjusting it to just the right amount. But if you can get your hands on it, my buddy over here got all of this heated canola for $2 a bushel, when canola was at $12 a bushel. Wow.
And made biodiesel out.
And made biodiesel. Actually, he was an SVO. So he just crushed it and turned it into SVO. And that's all I've got. Any questions?
Maybe for next year you can look into making ethanol out of the meal.
Probably not. I don't have time for that.
I'm just saying, not doing it, I'm just saying researching it. I'm looking forward to Gromar's presentation tomorrow if she shows, because she's been doing a lot of research lately on ethanol, ethyl esters.
Yeah.
And if the chemistry can be made to work, that would be another cash flow stream.
I'm not opposed by any means. I don't mean to diss ethanol. I'm short on time.
Hey, you're working 80 hours a week already.
Was there another question?
Yeah. Have you looked at any alternative to the RBD process, such as like microbial sieves or ion exchange? It could do the same thing on a micro scale?
Yeah, I've thought about that. I've thought about ion exchange at least. It seems to me, although I'm not a chemical engineer, that ion exchange should pull out the phospholipids, or some of them, but I'm not convinced. I don't know. It seems like it should.
Why not?
I don't know. It seems like it should, but just based on, like, I haven't done the experiments to confirm. And these folks, these biodiesel producers that do it, they had ion exchange. That it should have taken those out. I don't understand why it didn't.
Well, because it wasn't engineered for that. The nature of ion exchange, the resin beads are specifically engineered to take out what you want them to take out. You just have to go back to R&D, and you take something like a purolite, amberlite product, and you add in the affinity for phospholipids. You repack it with a different type of resin being banned. There's ion beads that are designed for innumerable processes.
I'll talk to my purolite guy.
Yeah.
There's definitely cross-flow membranes that have been developed and that work to be done, for sure.
For the non-hydratables.
Yeah, for non-hydratables, and they've been doing that for a while, but it's not commercially being done anywhere. There's still, I mean, I've read a lot of papers about people doing membrane degumming, and it works great. I mean, it's just a quick right through and you're good, but there's really nothing on the market right now. And I spoke to a gentleman, or a professor out of Texas A&M, who offered to maybe, you know, try and figure out a way that we could get our hands on a lab scale one, and that they quoted us like 100,000.
Who was it?
A&M.
Yeah.
I'd have to look it up. But I'll come back.
I took the oil extraction workshop at A&M.
It's from the same guy that does it there. I spoke to him about it, and they've definitely been doing membrane degumming for a long time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's very expensive, so it's just not.
And the other thing is that, to be clear, the RBD process is not necessarily the degumming process. If you were to go to, for instance, a Cargill crush plant, over there, what they do is there's two separate plants. There's the crush plant and there's the refinery plant, and they're two separate plants. So the crush plant, they extract the oil. Now they're using a solvent extraction, but at the end they degum. They do super degumming in the crush plant. Excuse me. So off that stream, that's one stream that could either get shipped to a biodiesel plant at that point or go over to the refinery plant to get brought to food grade through the RBD process. But the point is that it should, in theory, by the time it hits RBD, be already completely degummed. So the degumming, although it does has some benefits in terms of, like you mentioned, smoke temperature, color, taste, all that kind of stuff, it's not necessarily the degumming that they're interested in.
You don't have any information on the Chinese towel, do you?
Chinese towel, I don't. Sorry. Heard some rumors.
I've been reading about it from magazines and stuff. They show it to high nutrition.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
And it grows in our house like triple heads.
Well, send some down. I'd be happy to crush it. You know? Just send me some seeds. Be happy to crush them. That's one oil seed I haven't crushed yet.
I'm considering trying.
Any other questions? We all set? Awesome. Well, thanks for your time.
How much is the Canola yielding this one as well? It's pretty good.